Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in for our monthly broadcast here with Terrapin Technology for our webinar Wednesday. My name is Joseph O'Donnell. I'm a senior technical engineer and instructor at Terrapin. And joining us today, as usual, we have the dynamic Betty Nelson.
Welcome, everyone.
And joining us also again as our guest speaker and commentator is Benjamin Wadsworth with our telecom section from Terrapin Technology. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So this week or this month, we're talking about something very interesting. We get a lot of questions about this, and I say we. A lot of times, this has to do with Benjamin's group and the questions that he gets regarding conference rooms. And since we've been going back to how things have changed with COVID, and we've been talking about best practices for web conferencing and the best equipment to hold a web meeting. Today, we're going to talk with what we refer to as our resident expert on this subject, Benjamin, who has helped many of our clients transform. And I'm not just pulling that reference out of a hat or a dictionary, really to transform their conference rooms into a dynamic meeting room. So what about this, Betty? Is this true? I mean, are they really cutting the cord and moving?
Well, I mean, what's so strange to me is that people are meeting in a conference room during COVID. But I guess they are. Benjamin, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you'd think they're kind of on the way out, right, Ben?
You would think that people aren't really using conference rooms anymore, but I've actually seen plenty of our clients and even people outside of our clients still using their conference rooms, although it looks very different today. There's less people in the room, they're spaced away from each other, and there's almost always a remote component to that, a video conference component to that these days.
Very interesting. Well, let's get talking about this a little bit. We have some nice pictures and things to share with you. We have 5 takeaway points we're going to share with you. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video so that way you can concentrate on what we have to share and not my face, because I think our presentation is much prettier than my face. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's move on into how people are using them, right, Betty?
Right. Well, I mean, I know there are social distancing orders for work. So what are the reasons that people need to be meeting in the same room, Benjamin?
Well, in the legal market specifically, I've seen people using their conference rooms for depositions, and I've seen actual arbitrations being conducted in either conference rooms or larger rooms set up to act like a conference room. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I've been told as far as depositions, the attorney does want to be there with their client, and they want to be able to, tell them immediately to not answer a question or give them guidance. Whereas if you're on a video conference application, you may not have that immediate interaction with your client. As far as arbitrations, people do like to see who they're speaking to. They like to see the reactions of witnesses, and they like to see the reactions of the opposing counsel. So there is reasons, even in the private sector, outside of the legal market, we have a lot of clients that still use their conference rooms because they really do want to conduct business in a face-to-face scenario.
That's very interesting. I mean, that kind of gives us a taste of, what the real world examples were then, but how in a new revised way now that are doing work, or really how the conference rooms have transformed from what they used to be to what they're being used for now. What type of things, you talked about a couple things, Ben, but how could you elaborate on how it's transformed from what you kind of mentioned to now what you're seeing in conference rooms?
Sure. So conference rooms in general, even outside of, prior to COVID, conference rooms have been transforming from a space where people sat down and talked at each other to becoming more of a collaborative space. So conference rooms today are used more for sharing materials and also for connecting with people that can't necessarily make it in person. So we do see a lot of focus on collaboration and a lot more focus on video conferencing these days.
Very interesting. So again, the key part of that, no matter what type of business you're in, is basically being able to communicate effectively with people in or outside the office, right?
Correct, correct.
So Betty, what type of technology? You and Ben had kind of talked about this a lot, but
We
take us
we
to
have.
technology on that.
Yeah, we have, because years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when firms were realizing that their conference rooms were no longer just face-to-face meeting rooms, and we were, you know, definitely installing projectors and microphones and different things to make it more of a multimedia experience. Every time I saw a firm look into setting up a true video conferencing room, the cost just seemed so high. And then the technology was constantly changing. Benjamin, how has that changed?
Well, unfortunately, technology is always changing. We can't stop that. But the truth is, it's really been for the better. So as you mentioned, 10 years ago, video conferencing was something that was extremely expensive. You had to buy a piece of hardware that would connect to another piece of hardware in somebody else's office to connect two of you over the internet. Now we have application-based video conferencing like Skype and Zoom and Teams, and a whole other, there's a ton of different applications out there used for video conferencing. That's really brought the cost down to just needing a PC, some microphones, camera, and that's going to get you into the video conferencing game. Couldn't do that 10 years ago. But, and there's a lot of other things technology has done to help out. Things like VGA, which aren't around anymore. That's an analog technology that was supposedly done away with in 2015. Now we see technologies like HDMI that can provide higher resolutions, digital signals. 10, 15 years ago, we were limited to 15, 20 feet on an HDMI cable. Now we can extend those well over 300 feet. So really, the advancing in technology has helped us to create better spaces, and also has brought the cost down overall for providing the kind of interaction that people want in the conference room.
That's very good. I mean, that's interesting because a lot of times we think about technology and it's advancing so much, and we get worried about investing in something and then it's not going to be worthwhile. But everything you're talking about is sort of like where we would expect technology to take something and actually make it better. So if someone is interested in upgrading their conference room from zero or very little technology, what would be the first thing that you would do?
So the first thing I always do is arrange to have a meeting. Of course, these days that's typically via Zoom or Teams, and discuss what the conference room is actually used for. So we typically like to list out the absolute necessities of the conference room, what you need to do in it, and then also list out wish list items, things that you would like to add to the conference room. Every conference room is different. There are some, basic design pieces, like you have to have some way to display stuff in the conference room. You have to have a way to connect to that display. You have to have some kind of audio, and but from there's a lot of additions that could be done. There's a lot of different ways we could take the conference room. That's really dictated by the intended use of the conference room.
Very good. Now, Betty, you and I were talking about this because the conference rooms we're accustomed to in the past of being, technologically advanced, kind of come back to this picture.
Right. I mean, this was the setup. This was the goal, the ceiling mounted projector, the Polycom phone, it was the way to go. So that's what things were like the last time I was tasked with helping to set up a conference room with technology. How has that changed, Benjamin?
So Polycom phones are still in pretty common use. We tend to shy away from that and do recommend having an audio system that's built into the room. That gives a lot of advantages. We use a piece of equipment called a digital signal processor, or a DSP, that can handle your microphones, your speakers. It brings it all into one central unit and processes all that audio. It allows us to design the system and really tune it to the specific room. So you're going to get the best audio quality possible. Whereas the Polycom phone can't really do that. The best you do is plug in your satellite mics and hope that it covers the whole room. Whereas if we do a built-in audio system, we can guarantee it's going to cover the whole room. We could fine tune it for different noise sources. Maybe you have a fan that causes a lot of noise in the room. We could tune the system to get as much of that noise out as possible. And also these digital signal processors can connect to a computer via USB, which is something your Polycom phone can't do. So it allows you to bring in that audio and bring it into your computer for use in video conferencing applications. Projectors is a whole nother, sorry to interrupt, but projectors is a whole nother story. That's something that is not in common use in conference rooms anymore. Really, there's a lot of issues with projectors with ambient light and cost. Where they really fit in is when you need a large image in the most cost-effective large image. We see a lot of projectors still used in classrooms because you do need a 10 or 15-foot wide image, whereas your typical conference room, you don't. So a display is a much better option.
Very interesting. So no more huddling around that Polycom phone like football players. Yeah, we were talking about this too. And of course, the next question that always comes to mind is, budget. So when do you recommend discussing a budget? And I thought it was interesting, Benjamin, if you want to mention when we are discussing this, when budget, if it's not in a coordinated effort on when to discuss it, sometimes when the budget question comes up.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, budget is extremely important when designing a system. It's one of the very first questions I ask. A lot of times that's not a consideration that people are thinking about when they're thinking about upgrading their audiovisual system, but budget dictates what can be put into the room. There is a lot of design features that may not be allowable if the budget isn't where it needs to be. So setting a budget allows us to have a very frank discussion about what can be installed in this room and what we can't do within that budget. Yeah,
because I remember we were talking about this. You had mentioned that many times you'll be given ideas, design concepts, you'll put something together. And when you ask about a budget in the beginning, they don't really give you one or even say that they have one. You'll put something together, and then after they look at it, then they say they have a budget. So it's almost like they put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's like going to the wrong car dealership based on what you can get a loan for.
Right, exactly. I think my grandmother used to tell me, says, you have champagne taste with a beer budget. So, that's we'll talk about that a little bit later. I think I jumped the gun on that one. But anyway, Betty, so what's the next thing, Betty?
Right. So if you get a budget together, then where do we go from there, Benjamin?
So from there, we actually created a design based on our initial conversation, what the desires were for the room and what the absolute needs were for the room. We created a design within that budget, and we deliver as much of those desires as possible within that budget. So that's again why the budget's really important. So we can be upfront and let the client know that these items can't possibly be included for this budget, or your budget is large enough that we can give you all these bells and whistles you would like, depending on what you need. And then we ask questions like, do we add on items for video conferencing? Do you share a lot of content on the screen? Do you want to do wireless sharing? That's all, again, budget dependent, because all those items are not expensive, but they do add up and eventually can become expensive.
Sure,
that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, the type of screen, the resolution. Are you going to be viewing graphics? Is it going to be video conferencing with people? Those are all questions that come up as part of that conversation.
Right. Does the room need to be mic'd? All sorts of good things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and size of the display, that's something that needs to be addressed, and that's really based on, as you mentioned, Joe, what kind of content you're showing on the screen. Is it just PowerPoints? Are you showing very detailed Excel spreadsheets that people need to read from 40 feet away? That's going to dictate the resolution and the size of your screen that you need in that room.
Yeah, excellent point. So what are some of the most common designs that you see? And we have a few examples here we're going to bring up. And these are designs that you have worked with clients to design something within their budget. So let's go ahead and bring a few of those up. So kind of describe what are some of the typical designs that you see?
Yeah, so the very basics that's very typical in pretty much every room we do is to have a display on the wall, a display of the right size for the room, and to have a dedicated PC in that room. I do recommend that. It just makes things simpler rather than different people coming in with their different laptops. The laptops are all set up different. If you have a dedicated PC, we can make sure it's always going to work when you turn your screen on and you want to use the conference room. And then from there, some way to connect. So typically we see an HDMI connection at the table. HDMI has become the de facto standard for video connections, although there are a lot of other standards out there. And then at that point, audio, do we need microphones, do we need speakers, and so on and so forth. So this room right here is you can see we have some microphones on the table, microphone pods. Those are actually little arrays with 16 microphones built into them. Please excuse the wires running across the table. I snapped this photo before it was complete. Those were actually going to be mounted into the table and drilled through the table, so you wouldn't see any wires on top of the table. But there's a microphone array in this room in order to be used for both video conferencing and telephone conferencing. And here, this is kind of our simple, small conference room setup. This is just a display on the wall. There's a dedicated PC mounted behind the display. There's an HDMI connection at the table. And then below the display is a little all-in-one speakerphone camera. There's a camera built into there. And then there's a speakerphone for doing audio conferencing and video conferencing. It works well for small rooms. So I'd say less than a 20 by 20, but if we do anything larger than that, we would be doing microphones on the table like you saw on the previous slide.
Perfect.
And here, this is probably one of the flagship rooms I've done recently. I don't know if you could see all the details, but this actually has microphones hanging from the ceiling. Ceiling microphones are actually not the best option. Tabletop microphones are a much better option because the speaker is actually closer to the microphone. The reason ceiling microphones were used in this case is because there was a very strong aesthetic consideration for this design. They didn't want to have anything on the table. So we do have pendant microphones in this room that are almost unnoticeable when you walk in. A camera above the display for doing video conferencing. And this display, in this particular instance, is an interactive display. So it acts like a whiteboard. People can draw on it, save images, and do whatever else you do on a whiteboard or a computer, all mixed into one.
Cool.
And then here's actually the same conference room from the first slide from a different view. Again, a display on the wall. Camera for video conferencing, microphones on the table for your video conferencing, and HDMI connections at the table so that people can show content.
Awesome. So what is the final piece of the puzzle?
So the final piece, this is one thing that is often overlooked, or I have a lot of clients say that they don't need this, is a control system.
Okay.
Control systems, I feel, are vitally important to ease of use. So often people think that, we'll just use the remote control for the TV to control the entire audiovisual system. It can work. It can work if everybody in the room has enough training and they really know what's going on. But more often than not, I've seen people extremely confused about how to do anything other than turn the TV on. They're not sure where to switch to get the right connection to come up. When we introduce a control system, that allows us to simplify that entire procedure. The goal of any control system is someone walks into the room without any training and intuitively knows what to do. They know what buttons to press to turn it on. They know what button to press to show what the content they want to show. They have a knob to turn volume up and down or a button to turn volume up and down. So everything's intuitive. Nobody really needs to have special training, or takes a lot of the confusion and aggravation out of using the conference room. You can see in this picture, control system can be anything from the prior slide, which was a custom built graphical user interface on a touch screen, to a simple button panel. If nothing else, a simple button panel allows people to have a more intuitive use of the room.
That's one of my favorites that you set up, Benjamin, and how you could design those. Push a button to turn on the display, push a button to turn the computer on, push a button to do the presentation on the TV. Super simple. It doesn't take a whole manual or 45 minutes of training on how to use these things.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think so many of us have attended web meetings where they have to call the IT department to help with all of those issues. And, it would be my number one thing to say, keep it simple, and for sure offer training. Everyone in the firm should be able to use it with a simple training guide that's sitting there always in the conference room laminated, or maybe it's so simple you don't even need that.
Yeah, that's a key point, because even with the simplest systems, that people need to have guidance to know who to call, how do you use the system, how to
Right.
troubleshoot it, how do I take something from my computer and display it onto the system, or whatever they might be doing, whether it's multimedia, pictures, documentation, or whatever. Benjamin, normally when you design and you engineer these things, you're keeping that in mind too, on how to provide the training and something that will be easy for them to use as well, right?
Yes, yeah. That's one of my biggest concerns in any system, is that we walk away and nobody knows how to use it. So I really do push on control systems. I really think people need them. I know sometimes that's not within the budget, so we deal with that as it comes. But control systems can do so much. They can automate a lot of the processes. One button press can do everything from turning a TV on, switching to a correct input, shutting the shades, turning the lights down. It could do all that with one button press, rather than someone trying to figure out a 10-step process to turn the TV on, switch to the right channel, turn the volume up to here, shut the blinds, turn the lights down.
Yep.
But now, we've talked about a lot of stuff here. Are there any particular things that you would say are kind of your pet peeves when it comes to the design of conference rooms?
I'm the one who insisted on including this, because I lived this nightmare. Show the next slide, and I will tell you, I once worked at a firm that was just committed to having this entire floor of gorgeous conference rooms, but nobody really thought about what it would take to make them functional in terms of presentations and web meetings. So I think Benjamin will tell you his biggest pet peeve is too many windows.
Yes, I mean, I'll generalize that and say my real biggest pet peeve is when architects get involved in design with zero thought to technology at all.
Yeah.
But in recent years, the design concept for conference rooms has really moved towards having either exterior glass windows or storefront windows on the interior side. So having glass all around the conference room looks great, but it introduces a lot of problems. One being ambient light, which you can actually see right here in this photo. I imagine this photo on the left, that projector image has to be horrible. There's a lot of ambient light in here. Projectors aren't very bright. Of course, with displays these days, that's not as big of a factor. However, there is one issue that I have seen when you have a lot of ambient light coming through windows, is when you have cameras for video conferencing, it backlights those cameras and it makes the image look horrible.
Okay.
So in rooms like this, you end up having to have blackout blinds everywhere. It just, it's not attractive, and it may look nice, but it's not effective for the technology in place. Another major issue with having glass surfaces everywhere, and what I've seen more and more now, is instead of having suspended tile ceiling, is having open industrial ceiling. I've seen that aesthetic used a lot in modern designs. And actually down here in the bottom right, you can see hardwood floor. I'll add that in there. Adding all those items adds in reflective surfaces in the room. Those reflective surfaces cause echoes, and that wreaks havoc on microphones. It just makes the audio sound horrible on microphones. It sounds like you're in a cave when you're talking. And I did discuss installing audio DSPs to account for a lot of these factors, but the DSPs, no matter how great they are, cannot make up for the physical problems within the room, which glass especially causes.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, these are great things to talk about, because these are things that you could help with if someone was designing or going to be building out a conference room, you could work with them and their architect to introduce things that would work with the technology rather than impede it or introduce new problems, which would then increase, the budget that would have to be required to rectify those, right?
Yeah, the best case scenario, and I think this isn't just for audio visual or conference rooms, for any kind of technology deployment. I think the best case scenario is to have the technology consultant involved in the design process, because, maybe aesthetically you still want glass, but at least up front of the problems that it's going to cause, so that you don't come down the line later and wonder why you're in the situation you're in.
Yep.
Very good. Well, thank you, Benjamin. Those are very good. So let's just kind of recap. We've talked about a lot of stuff here. Number one, in transforming your conference room from what it used to be and how it was used in the past to how we're now using them, especially post-COVID, is turning into a dynamic meeting room. Number one, know what your budget is and let that be right up front, so you know where the money is going to go, rather than spinning wheels on a design and then later on going, well, that's not what we can afford or where we can go with something. Two is make sure you talk to someone who knows the technology, someone who can design something really great within that budget that you've set. Third, right. The third one I think is, all these are really good, but third one works really well with what Benjamin is talking about, right, Betty?
Yes, and I was just going to say, if you have somebody involved that understands technology at the design level, you can not only design for today's technology, you can place the infrastructure for tomorrow's technology. And that's super important. So behind the wall, you might have a completely different setup that you plan on using in the future. Say if the price starts coming down on this certain type of technology you want to use, or give yourself a couple options, put up a nice piece of art, but behind the wall, make sure it's plumbed so that you could have audio visual if you decide to use that room at a later time in that manner. Right. There are so many, if you're doing a build out and you're doing tenant improvements, take advantage of that time when the walls are not up and make, some forward thinking decisions. Absolutely.
Because they'll know the questions to ask if you're using glass or concrete. If you are going to have those type of aesthetics, how you can incorporate art that also acts as a sound buffer. There are things that type of consultant can help you to engineer as part of the design.
You bet.
And then, of course, easy to use control system. Betty, you and I have been through situations where that's just not the case, right?
Right. We've sat for 10, 15 minutes waiting to start training while the IT department's being called, they're tracking them down, they're coming in, they're trying to get everybody set up. So it's definitely, from my perspective, would be way at the top.
Exactly. And then, of course, no matter how simple your room is that you're going to be using for conferences, have some training on it. Have a very simple and well-designed handout that's in the room that can be used by anybody who walks in. And have maybe even just a 30-minute presentation with your company on the new technology and how the room works, what's available, how do you get help, how to consult the quick reference card that's been created.
Yeah.
And then those things all help.
Yeah, sometimes I feel it's unfortunate because you'll assign a certain group the responsibility of maintaining the conference room, like office services, but they never really use that technology themselves. It seems a little unfair to me. So I think it's always wise to identify, people that have a natural flair for technology in each group in your firm, and make sure somebody in every single group in your firm knows well how to use this. And then when conferences are set up, make sure one of those individuals are available.
That sounds great. Well, that is going to recap exactly what our purpose was for today. And Benjamin, we appreciate you taking time to help put this information together and offer your expertise in these questions and how to help transform our conference rooms into a dynamic virtual meeting room. Thank you all very much for attending. If you have any questions, we'll keep it live for just a few minutes where we can entertain those. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us at info@terrapintechnology.com. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.